Hi everybody, my name is Alison and I'm from Beckett and I am reading Stuart Little by E.B. White for the Berkshire Museum 24-hour lullaby and bedtime story readout. Now I did chapter 1 and then I looked ahead to chapter 2 and it's very, very short. So before I send this over to the museum, I'm going to read out chapter 2 and then you can all go to your library and get Stuart Little and you can keep reading it out with your mom and your dad. All right? Well, you never know. The museum may have me keep sending chapters. Do you all have your jammios on? And are you all snuggled up by the fire? You can see my little Christmas tree. I started pulling them out for the season early this year because we need a little Christmas right this very minute. Candles in the window, carols at the spinet. Yes, we need a little Christmas right this very minute. Need a little Christmas now. So, remember where we left Stuart? He had gone down the drain after his mother's ring, and it was so slimy down the drain that he took a bath, and then he sprinkled himself with his mother's violet water. Chapter 2 is called Home Problems. Stuart was also helpful when it came to ping pong. The Littles liked ping pong, but the balls had a way of rolling under chairs, sofas, and radiators, and this meant that the players were forever stooping down and reaching under things. Stuart soon learned to chase the balls, and it was a great sight to see him come out from under a hot radiator, pushing a ping pong ball with all his might, the perspiration rolling down his cheeks. The ball, of course, was almost as high as he was, and he had to throw his whole weight against it in order to keep it rolling. The Littles had a grand piano in their living room, which was all right, except one of the keys was a sticky key and it didn't work properly. Mrs. Little said she thought it must be the damp weather, but I don't see how it could be the damp weather, for the key had been sticking for about 4 years, during which time there had been many bright, clear days. But anyway, the key stuck, and with a great inconvenience to anyone trying to play the piano. It bothered George particularly when he was playing the scarf dance, which was rather lively. It was George who had the idea of stationing Stuart inside the piano to push the key up the second it was played. This was no easy job for Stuart, as he had to crouch down between the felt hammers so that he couldn't get hit on the head. But Stuart liked it just the same. It was exciting inside the piano, dodging about, and the noise was quite terrific. Sometimes, after a long session, he would emerge quite deaf, as though he had just stepped out of an airplane after a long journey, and it would be some little time before he really felt normal again. Mr. and Mrs. Little often discussed Stuart quietly between themselves when he wasn't around, for they had never quite recovered from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. He was so very tiny, and he presented so many problems to his parents. Mr. Little said that, for one thing, there must be no references to mice in their conversation. He made Mrs. Little tear from the nursery songbook the page about 3 blind mice. See how they run. "I don't want Stuart to get a lot of notions in his head," said Mr. Little. "I should feel badly to have my son grow up fearing that a farmer's wife was going to cut off his tail with a carving knife. It is such things that make children dream bad dreams when they go to bed at night." "Yes," replied Mrs. Little, "and I think we had better start thinking about the poem, 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. I think it might embarrass Stuart to hear mice mentioned in such a belittling manner." "That's right," said her husband. "But what shall we say when we come to that line in the poem? We'll have to say something. We just can't say, 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring.' That doesn't sound complete. It needs a word to rhyme with house." "Well, what about louse?" asked Mrs. Little. "Or grouse," said Mr. Little. "I suggest souse," remarked George, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room. It was decided that louse was the best substitute for mouse. And so when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little's carefully rubbed out, And so when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little carefully rubbed out the word mouse from the poem and wrote in the word louse. And Stuart always thought that the poem went this way: "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse." The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. Do you see the mouse hole? There it is. A pantry is something where people will keep their dry goods, pasta and rice and flour. The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. This hole had been made by some mice in the days before the Littles came to live in the house, and nothing had been done about stopping it up. Mr. Little was not at all sure that he understood Stuart's real feeling about a mouse hole. He didn't know where the mouse hole led to, and it made him uneasy to think that Stuart might someday feel the desire to venture into it. "After all, he does look a good deal like a mouse," said Mr. Little to his wife, "and I've never seen a mouse yet that didn't like to go into a hole." That is the end of chapter 2. So, remember at the beginning of chapter 2 how Stuart would find all the ping pong balls and he'd push them out from under the piano? And then when he was inside the piano, and every time that sticky key would go down, Stuart would get inside it and push it back up. And when he would come out, he was sometimes so deaf because he'd been in there for half an hour, maybe even an hour. Can you imagine? What would you do if you had a mouse as a brother or sister? Right? This is Alison from Beckett, and that was the second chapter of Stuart Little by E.B. White, called Home Problems. I hope you'll all tune in to the Berkshire Museum 24-hour readathon of lullabies and good night books. See you later, everybody. Bye-bye.